Good morning. How is everyone? I'm just checking in. It's been kind of a rough week, I think, for a lot of people. We've been talking about our cycle of loving neighbors, the second greatest command, love your neighbors as yourself, getting into the lives of the neighbors, moving them to loving God, which is the first and greatest commandment, moving them to serving others and repeating this cycle. Our theme this year is God first, and our theme verse is Deuteronomy 6:7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. This is the final quarter of 2023, and we're talking about God and others. If you have a piece of paper and a note card, maybe you have it, maybe you don't. If you have something in front of you, I want you to write these 4 words on that note card. I have it written on a little note card in my Bible. If that was me. If that was me. And then I put a little ... And then below that, I want you to write, what's in it for me? You hear the difference between those two statements? Both pretty powerful statements, but one is, if that was me, ... and the other is, what's in it for me? And I want you to circle the one that most fits you most of the time. You see, the first one is what we're going to be talking about today, and it's the subject of the sermon. It's the golden rule. And it allows us to put ourselves in the shoes of other people and say, if that was me, I would want to be treated in such and such a way. This past week was really quite eventful. I didn't even get a call out. It was a wild day. Dave Zersky and I, we're not sick of each other yet. We've spent a lot of time together this week. But Thursday was the longest day. On Thursday, we took Christina to Johnstown to what was supposed to be her first radiation appointment, where they were just going to do mapping. They weren't going to start treatments, but they were going to do some mapping and prepare for treatments. And the closer we got to Johnstown, the worse shape she was in, and she really was struggling. And she was having a hard time breathing, and she was coughing, and just generally didn't look good. She didn't have color. And we got into the office, and the nurses came in, and they checked her vitals, and everything was terrible. And they looked at each other, and they were like, "We're not even going to allow her to see the oncologist. Like, this is a straight to the ER." And so they called an ambulance. They didn't even think she could make it to Somerset, so they said, we're going to send her straight to Conemaugh because it's right up the road. And what really caught my attention in that moment, in that chaos, was that the nurses looked at David and I, and they said, we're just so taken aback that you guys are sticking by her and that you guys are with her and you're going to the hospital, and we can tell you genuinely love her and you genuinely care. And that's not a reflection on us, I don't think, because for us, we just kind of do what we do. But Dave and I were talking when we got over to the ER, and I said, that really struck me, because what that told me was that this isn't typical behavior when people come in to the hospital or to appointments like that, where people are fighting for their life, they're dying of cancer, and the nurses are kind of shocked that there are people beside them supporting them. And we see that in the hospitals. We've heard this theme. We've been with Christina a lot. It's not the first time we've heard that. People are surprised that she has people who come in, she has visitors. When we were in Pittsburgh, the team of doctors said, can we replicate you guys and send you up and down the hall and just go visit with people? And I thought, isn't that sad? I mean, it's great that Christina has support, and we all gladly do it. By the way, Valinda told me, I think it was yesterday we were talking, She said when she talked to Christina and went to her apartment before this episode on Thursday, she said she was in Christina's apartment and she said, I need to go show you something. And she walked over and she grabbed these little cards and she opened them up and she started reading them. And Christina teared up and she said, the Wednesday night group here wrote these cards of encouragement to me. This last Wednesday, we spent time, adults and kids. We sat down and we wrote all kinds of notes of encouragement so that when she's down, she can open those up and she can read them. And she just was so thrilled by that. And it keeps bringing me back to the statement, if that was me, if I was dying of cancer, or at least struggling, I can't say that she's dying because she's like a cat with 9 lives. We keep teasing with her. She's actually doing really well now. She's still up at Conemaugh, and she's under the care of great doctors and nurses. And I was up to see her yesterday, and she looks really good. She's not doing great, but she looks so much better. And she was in good spirits. And I just thought, if that was one of us, would we want somebody to be by our side? Of course we would. And there are certain things in life that are absolutely essential for all of us. They're both desires and they're needs that all of us have. And I listed just a handful of them. But we could probably list 100 more of these. Compassion. All of us desire compassion. We want people to be compassionate towards us, especially when we kind of mess up and make mistakes, or we're kind of down on our luck, or things in our life just isn't going well and things are kind of mounting. We desire compassion from other people. Nurturing. All of us need some form of nurturing, even as adults. We need somebody to nurture us when we're not doing well. Kindness. We all desire and need kindness. Mercy. Whenever we do things that, say things or do things that are out of character or that we didn't mean to do, and all of us make mistakes. Believe me, we all do things that we regret, and we desire mercy. And then you have your necessities, your food, your water, your shelter, your clothing. We all need those things. And so I wrote the opposite of these because I want us to imagine just one day without one of these things. Just one day, 24 hours, without one of these things, where it was absent, literally absent from every person we interacted with for an entire 24-hour period. Take away compassion. What's the opposite of compassion? Well, it's cruelty. You remove compassion, and what if for 24 hours every single person you came into contact was cruel to you? They mistreated you, they were verbally abusive, they were short with you, they were impatient, they were just nasty to you. For 24 hours, what would that do to your psyche? And yet there's, right, exactly, it would crash and burn. It would lead us to depression. And I'm just talking 24 hours. And think of the amount of people, the amount of children, the amount of adults included, who are treated without compassion, who don't have people in their lives to treat them with compassion. And I'm talking about just for 24 hours for us. What about nurturing? What's the opposite of nurturing? How about somebody who uses you? They're called the takers in life. People who take advantage of you and they use you. That's the opposite of nurturing. Imagine 24 hours where every single person who came into contact with you was using you for something. Kindness. Not necessarily the opposite, but it's you take away kindness, you have anger and mistreatment. Imagine for 24 hours if kindness was stripped away and everybody you came into contact with was an absolute jerk. Mercy. The opposite of that is grudges and people who like to humiliate you. They like to point out the things that you did wrong. They like to advertise that to people and let people know what an idiot you are, and how awful you are. The opposite of mercy. Take mercy away for 24 hours. Food. Take that away, you have hunger and starvation. Shelter. You remove that, you have exposure. The temperatures are getting cold. Last night, we prayed before bed. Cameron prayed. We alternate whose turn it is. Cameron prayed, and one of the things he said is, God, it's getting colder. Please be with the homeless people who don't have shelter. And we could go on and on and on. And so the question is, when we come into contact with people, and every day, almost inevitably, we're all going to come into contact with some other human, are we asking the question, if that was me, I would want ... Or do we fail to see the problems that people have in their life, and do we say, what's in it for me? I don't really have time to go visit, whoever it is in the hospital. Did you ever go into a nursing home and notice the lack of visitors? I mean, every single time. I have never walked into a nursing home and been like, oh my goodness, there is an abundance of family members visiting the people who are in here. Never. Are we asking the question just about life in general, what's in it for me? What can I do to better myself? What can I do to, whatever it is, to make more money, to buy more things, to spend leisurely time, to veg out? I've had a rough day. What's in it for me? Do we take that stance, or do we say, if that was me, I would want to be treated this way? And it's a world of difference. And that's the guiding principle in Matthew chapter 7. In fact, Jesus says it's the golden rule, and that all the law and the prophets are fulfilled by this. Okay, but I want to back up just a little bit. And I'm not going to read these whole sections, but Jesus is talking about judging each other. You remember he says, you're pointing out the speck in somebody else's eye, but you have this log or this plank in your own eye. You hypocrite. First remove that log out of your own eye so that you can see to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. He's saying don't judge people. Don't be quick to judge people. Don't be harsh with people, because you might have some stuff in your own life that you need to deal with first. Then he says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. Or which one of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If then you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? In other words, he's saying, I want you to ask for these things so that your Father will give them, so that you can help other people. This is not a what's in it for me? Come on, God, pad my spiritual bank here with things so that I can be all puffed up. He's saying, ask God for all of these things so that you can bless other people. And then he picks up in verse 12. And I love this because in one sentence, he says, this is the law and the prophets. All of the law and the prophets, he sums up into this one sentence. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. All of the law, all the commandments, everything the prophets said, everything they prophesied about, all of this is explained in this golden rule. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. You want to end poverty and starvation and people who thirst and people who lack shelter? Start taking care of them. Start treating people with kindness. Start seeing them as people in need And don't just walk by and, name call and talk about how, well, you dug your own grave and, why don't you go get a job? And instead of doing that, teach them how to get a job. Ask the question, if that was me. When you walk by somebody who's outside and it's freezing cold and they don't have a jacket, ask yourself, if that was me. If that was me freezing cold and all these cars are driving by and nobody's stopping and nobody's putting a jacket over me, what would I want somebody to do? You see, it's such a simple, common sense thing, and we fail to see it because I think too often we're asking the question, what's in it for me? And we end up having a world that has cruel people and people who use and people with anger issues. Dave and I were up here the other day meeting with the engineers for the ramp, and we're outside and I see this old man driving in a U-Haul and there's a woman beside her, and I could tell just before they even drove by, I was like, she doesn't look right. And he drives by and next thing we hear this just screaming. And he just starts screaming at this woman and she just puts her head down. He drives past, and it kind of got the attention of our contractors, and I said, that poor woman, can you imagine what her life is like? When we have that attitude, what's in it for me, we fail to live out the law and the prophets that say we need to treat our neighbor with kindness and compassion, with love. We need to love God first and foremost. Before anything, we need to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then we need to love our neighbor as ourself. And as ourself is the part of this golden rule. It's what the golden rule is all about. If that were me, how would I want to be treated? Would I want to be shouted at and belittled and berated when I'm stuck in a small cab of a truck with somebody? Or do I want to be treated with kindness and compassion and mercy and nurturing and be given food and shelter and not having those things taken away from me? And Jesus goes on, he says, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. All these destructive behaviors, all these destructive things, the anger, the rage, the oppression, treating people horribly, it's so easy to get there, isn't it? I mean, we kind of look and you watch people's lives and you're like, oh my goodness, how did they get there? But then if you really stop and think about it, well, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's the path of addiction. It's so easy when life is absolutely just treating you horribly and people are treating you horribly. It's easy to go down that path of alcohol and drug addiction. Because people get to the point where they say, what is the point? What's the point? When we were in the hospital the other day, there was a guy who came in for a DUI, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he refused the blood work, which means it's an automatic year suspension of his life, and after a string of vulgarities that he gave out, and the nurses were so compassionate and so kind to him. They were fantastic. But he said, what's the point? I'm going to be homeless as soon as I walk out that door anyway. It's so easy to go down that path. And Jesus says that gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. He's telling people, take this path. Jesus is the only way. Love God first with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then we will automatically know how to, as Charles says, what to do what's right always. It's not rocket science, is it? It doesn't require a PhD. We don't have to go to school. We don't have to sit down and fill a notebook full of things like, now how am I supposed to treat other people? It's common sense. And Jesus is making that point that if you want to figure out the law and the prophets, Ask yourself, how would I want to be treated? How would I want others to treat me when I'm in these kinds of situations? And so I would say, honestly, write those 4 words down. If that was me, carry it with you, memorize it, write it on your heart, so that when you walk out and you interact with people this week, you start living it. And not start living it as if you've never done it before, but you live it every time with every person you come into contact with. Make it a practice. Make it a discipline to ask yourself, if that was me, what would I want other people to do? And when you start doing that, you realize that people are worth loving, that people are worth putting your time into. And yeah, you don't get this big reward, and you don't get pats on the back, and you don't get acknowledged for it almost ever. But that's not the point. That's not why we do it. We're not treating other people with kindness so that we can get accolades and be patted on the back. We do it because it's what's right. It's what makes the world a safer place, a better place, a happier place, a place where people are fed and clothed and they have water, they have kindness, they have compassion, they have somebody, out of all these people who mistreated them their whole life, they have somebody who actually cares about them. You know what that does for somebody in a time of desperation? It helps people to see hope. It helps them to begin to see Jesus in front of them. Be the person that helps other people when they're down. All of the law and the prophets hang on that. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken the step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have prayer needs and would like us to pray, we'd invite you to come up. We're going to all stand and say,